The Things They Carried, Speaking of Courage, by Tim O'Brien, Part 2. Clearly, he thought, this was not a story for Sally Carmer. She was Sally Gusson now. But no doubt Max would have liked it, the irony in particular, but Max had become a pure idea, which was its own irony. It was just too bad. If his father were here, riding shotgun around the lake, the old man might have glanced over for a second, understanding perfectly well that it was not a question of offensive language, but a fact. His father would have sighed and folded his arms and waited. A shitfield, Norman Boker would have said. And later that night, could have won the Silver Star for Valor. Right, his father would have murmured. I hear you. The Chevy rolled smoothly across the viaduct and up the narrow tar road. To the right was an open lake. To the left, across the road, most of the lawns were scorched dry like October corn. Hopelessly, round and round, a rotating sprinkler scattered lake water on Dr. Manson's vegetable garden. Already the prairie had been baked dry, but in August it would get worse. The lake would turn green with algae, and the golf course would burn up. The dragonflies would crack open for want of good water. The big Chevy curved past a Sentinel beach and the A&W root beer stand. It was his 8th revolution around the lake. He followed the road past the handsome houses with their docks and wooden shingles, back to Salter Park, across the causeway, around to Sunset Park, as though riding on tracks. The two little boys were still trudging along their 7-mile hike. Out on the lake, the man in the stall motor boat still fiddled with his engine. The pair of mud hens floated like wooden decoys, and the water skiers looked tanned and athletic, and the high school band was packing up its instruments, and the woman in pedal pushers patiently rebaited her hook for one last try. Quaint, he thought. A hot summer day, and it was all very quaint and remote. The 4 workmen had nearly completed preparations for the evening fireworks. Facing the sun again, Norman Boker decided it was at nearly 7 o'clock. Not much later, the tired radio announcer confirmed it, his voice rocking itself into a deep Sunday snooze. If Max Arnold were here, he would say something about the announcer's fatigue and relate to it, the bright pink sky, and the war, and courage. A pity that Max was gone, and a pity about his father, who had his own war, and who now preferred silence. Still, there wasn't so much to say. How the rain never stopped, how the cold worked into your bones. Sometimes the bravest thing on earth was to sit through the night and feel the cold in your bones. Courage was not always a matter of yes or no. Sometimes it came in degrees. Like the cold, sometimes you were very brave up to a point, and then beyond that point, you were not so brave. In certain situations, you could do incredible things. You could advance toward enemy fire, but in other situations which were not nearly so bad, you had trouble keeping your eyes open. Sometimes, like that night in the shitfield, the difference between courage and cowardice was something small and stupid. The way earth bubbled, and the smell, and a soft voice without flourishes. He would have told the exact truth. Late in the night, he would have said, we took some motor fire. He would have explained how it was still raining, and how the clouds were pasted to the field, and how the mortar rounds seemed to come right out of the clouds. Everything was black and wet. The field just exploded, rain and slop and sharpel, nowhere to run, and all they could do was worm down into the slime and cover up and wait. He would have described the crazy things he saw, weird things, like how at one point he noticed a guy lying next to him in the sludge, completely buried except for his face, and how after a moment the guy rolled his eyes and winked at him. The noise was fierce, heavy thunder, a motor rounds, and people yelling. Some of the men began shooting up flares, red and green and silver flares, all colors, and the rain came down in technicolor. The field was boiling. The shells made deep, slushy craters, opening up all those years of waste, centuries worth. The smell came bubbling out of the earth. 2 rounds bit close by, then a third, even closer, and immediately, off to his left, he heard somebody screaming. It was Kiowa. He knew that. The sound was ragged and clothed up, but even so, he knew the voice. A strange gargling noise, rolling sideways, he crawled toward the screaming in the dark. The rain was hard and steady. Along the perimeter there was a quick burst of gunfire. Around another round hit nearby, smearing up the shit and water. And for a few moments he ducked down beneath the mud. He heard the valves in his heart. He heard the quick feathering action of the hinges. Extraordinary, he thought. He came up. A pair of red flares puffed open, a soft, fuzzy glow, and in the glow he saw Kiowa's wide-open eyes settling down into the scum. Briefly, all he could do was watch. He heard himself moan, then moved again, crabbing forward. But when he got there, Kiowa was almost completely under. There was a knee, and there was an arm, and a gold wristwatch, and part of a boot. He could not describe what happened next, not ever, but he would have tried anyway. He would have spoken carefully so as to make it real for anyone who would listen. There were bubbles where Kiowa's head could have been. The left hand was curled open, the fingernails were filthy, the wristwatch gave a green fluorescent shine as it slipped beneath the thick waters. He would have talked about this and how he grabbed Kiowa by the boot and pulled it to him out. He pulled hard, but Kiowa was gone. And then suddenly he felt himself going too. He could taste it. The shit was under his nose and eyes. There were flares and motor rounds, and the stink was everywhere. It was inside him, in his lungs, and he could no longer tolerate it. Not here, he thought, not like this. He released Kiowa's boat and watched it slide away, slowly working his way up. He hoisted himself out of the deep mud, and then he lay still and tasted the shit in his mouth and closed his eyes and listened to the rain and explosions and bubbling noises. He was alone. He had lost his weapon, but it did not matter. All he wanted was a bath. Nothing else. A hot, soapy bath. Circling the lake, Norman Bowerker remembered how his friend Kiowa had disappeared under the waste and water. I didn't flip out, he would have said. I was cool. If things had gone right, if it hadn't been for that smell, I could have won the Silver Star. A good war story, he thought. But it was not a war story for war stories. It was not a war for war stories, nor the talk of valor. Nobody in town wanted to know about the terrible stink. They wanted good intentions and good deeds, but the town was not to blame, really. It was a nice little town, very prosperous, with neat houses and sanitary conveniences. Norman Burworker lit a cigarette and cranked open his window. 7:35, he decided. The lake had divided into 2 halves, one half still glistening, the other half caught in a shadow. Along the causeway, the 2 little boys marched on. The man in the stalled motorboat yanked frantically on the cord to his engine, and the 2 mud hens sought supper at the bottom of the lake, tails bobbing. He passed Sunset Park once again, and more houses, and the junior college, and the tennis courts, and the picnickers, who now sat waiting for the evening fireworks. The high school band was gone. The woman in the pedal pushers patiently toyed with her line. Although it was not yet dusk, the A&W was already awash with neon lights. He maneuvered his father's Chevy into one of the parking slots, let the engine idle, and sat back. The place was doing a good holiday business, mostly kids, it seemed, and a few farmers in for the day. He did not recognize any of the faces, A slim, hipless young car hop passed by, but when he hit the horn, she did not seem to notice. Her eyes slid sideways. She hooked a tray to the window of a firebird, laughing lightly, leaning forward to chat with the three boys inside. He felt invisible in the soft twilight. Straight ahead, over the takeout counter, swarms of mosquitoes electrocuted themselves against the aluminum pest-rid machine. It was a calm, quiet summer evening. He honked again, this time leaning on the horn. The young car hop turned slowly, as if puzzled, and said something to the boys in the firebird, and moved reluctantly towards him. Pinned to her shirt was a badge that said, "Eat Mama Burgers." When she reached his window, she stood straight up so that he was all he could see was the badge. "Mama Burger," he said. "Maybe some fries too?" The girl sighed, leaned down, and shook her head. Her eyes were puffy and airy light as cotton candy. "You blind?" she said. She put out her hand and tapped the intercom attached to the steel post. "Punch in the button and place your order. All I can do is carry the dumb trays." She stared at him for a moment. Briefly, he thought a question lingered in her fuzzy eyes, but then she turned and punched the button for him and returned to her friends in the Firebird. The intercom squeaked and said, "Order." "Mama Burger and fries," Norman Bowicker said. "Affirmative. Copy clear? No Rudy Tooty?" "Rudy Tooty? You know, man, root beer?" "A small one. Roger Dodger. Repeat. One mama fries, one small beer. Fire for effect. Stand by." The intercom squeaked and went dead. "Out," said Norman Boker. When the girl brought his tray, he ate quickly without looking up. The tired radio announcer in Des Moines gave the time, almost 8:30. Dirk was pressing in tight now. He wished there were somewhere to go. In the morning, he checked out some job possibilities, shot a few buckets down at the Y, maybe washed the Chevy. He finished his root beer and pushed the intercom button. "Order?" said the tiny voice. "All done, is it?" "I guess so." "Hey, loosen up," the voice said. "What you really need, friend?" Norman Boker smiled. "Well," he said, "how'd you like to hear about—" He stopped and shook his head. "Hear what, man?" "Nothing." "Well, hey," the intercom said. "I'm sure as not going anywhere. Screwed up to a post, for God's sake. Go ahead, try me." "Nothing." "You sure?" "Positive. All done." The intercom made a light sound of disappointment. "Your choice, I guess. Over and out." Out, said Norman Boker. On his 10th turn around the lake, he passed hiking boys for the last time. The man in the stalled motorboat was gone. The mud hens were gone. Beyond the lake, over Sally Gouffson's house, the sun had left a smudge of purple on the horizon. A band shell was deserted, and the woman in the pedal pushers quietly reeled her line. The Dr. Mason sprinkler went around and around. On his 11th revolution, he switched off the air conditioning, opened up his window, and rested his elbow comfortably on the sill, driving with one hand. There was nothing to say. He could not talk about it and never would. The evening was smooth and warm. If it had been possible, which it wasn't, he would have explained to his friend how his friend Kiowa slipped away the night beneath the dark, swampy field. He was folded in with the spore. He was a part of the waste. Turning on his headlights, driving slowly, Norman Boker remembered how he had taken a hold of Kiowa's boot and pulled hard, and how the smell was simply too much, and how he'd backed off, and in that way had lost the silver star. He wished he could have explained some of this, how he had been braver than he ever thought possible, how he had not been so brave as he wanted to be. The distinction was important. Max Arnold, who loved fine lines, would have appreciated it. And his father, who already knew, would have nodded. "The truth," Norman Boker would have said, "is I let the guy go. Maybe he was already gone." He wasn't, but maybe. No, I could feel it. He wasn't. Some things you can feel. His father would have been quiet for a while, watching the headlights against the narrow tar road. Well, anyways, the old man would have said, there's still the 7 medals, I suppose, 7 honeys, right? On his 12th revolution, the sky went crazy with color. He pulled to Sunset Park and stopped in the shadow of the picnic shelter. After a time, he got out and walked down to the beach and waded into the lake. Without undressing, the water felt warm against his skin. He put his head under. He opened his lips very slightly for the taste. He then stood up and folded his arms and watched the fireworks. For a small town, he decided, it was a pretty good show.